everyone. Glad you could make it. My name is Jeff Bentley. I'm your facilitator today. And this is the Roots, Tubers, and Bananas RTB seminar on seed systems. We're just waiting for a few more people to join us. And we're glad you could all be here. We're going to start by showing a few, talking about a few rules of the game. There we go. Housekeeping. So first of all, the videos and microphones will be off. So the participants won't be able to turn on their sound or their video camera. The session is being recorded and it will be available to watch or share later. If you would like to make a comment, please use the chat. And at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a Q&A button. Just click on that to leave questions during the presentations. So the presentations will be 15 minutes. During that, anytime during that 15 minutes, you can leave a question. And then during the question and answer session, the panelist will answer your question. We have simultaneous translation available, English to Spanish and to French. So use the interpretation button at the bottom of the screen to choose the language of your preference. All righty. For the question and answers, you can write a question at the bottom of the screen on the Q&A. Please leave your questions in the Q&A section, not in the chat. And the presenter will answer your questions during the 10-minute question and answer session after the presentation. So that's it for housekeeping. I'd like to introduce Graham Tila. He's going to welcome us to the event. I think everyone here knows Graham, but Graham is the founding director of RTB, the research program on roots, tubers, and bananas. And under his leadership, RTB became the largest research program in the CG system. So it's a pleasure to have Graham here to kick off our seminar.
So you should be seeing the screen now. Yes, that's sharing, right? So welcome. This is the toolbox for working with root tube and banana seed systems. We have a course running over the next 3 days, with a day, I think you get a day off. And this is an integral product of RTB. RTB is an alliance of different CG centers. But also the work on the toolbox really wouldn't have been possible without amazing collaboration from the University of Wageningen and Research and the University of Florida. So it's very much a multi-team effort. And of course, we work with a cast of thousands of others to make this all possible. And we'll be hopefully working with more people as a result of this course. So really extremely warm welcome to the webinar. And we hope you get a lot of value out of this. Of course, there's follow-up afterwards, many other resources available. And this is the beginning, or not the beginning, it's a point along the journey of helping build capacity for improved root tube and banana seed systems. The program, well, I expect some of you may have seen this slide before, but just to remind you, these are the crops that we have within the roots, tubers, bananas program, a multiple set of crops. We also work with some of the minor roots and tubers, but mostly we work on the major RTB crops, which you can see there. And our challenge really, this is a group of crops which to some degree have been neglected. So we're working globally to improve, to harness their untapped potential of the RTB crops to improve food security, nutrition, income, climate change, resilience, and gender equity. So quite a challenge there. And right at the heart of a lot of this stuff, of course, are seed systems. And then some people, probably most of you actually already seen this before, but people often ask, so why roots, tubers, and bananas? What do these sort of apparently random set of crops have in common, particularly bananas? Well, they're all genetically very complex, and they create big challenges for more challenges for breeders compared to grains. Critically, for our for this webinar and for our work, they all are vegetatively propagated, so they have similar seed systems. Seed of RTB crops is typically much bulkier. It transmits diseases easily because it's living materials. It's not and with the bulkiness, and because of the bulkiness comes higher cost and the need to often to locate the final production of seed for farmers closer to the point of use. So a lot of points in common. So opportunities for cross-learning, which we've done, I think, quite successfully so far in this in our seed system work. Another thing we've been working on is the RTB golden eggs. So the golden eggs are really the collective assets. So RTB has been running now for nearly 10 years, and the RTB golden eggs are the collective assets that we have put together as a result of the collaborations. And there's a multitude of golden eggs spanning different action areas of the one CGIR. You can see that systems transformation, resilient agri-food systems, and genetic innovation. Seed system toolbox in a way can be both in genetic innovation, but also it's integral, I think, to many things within resilient agri-food systems. So multiple contributions. You can find more about the toolbox if you go to the toolbox landing page there. And yeah, right at the, so we're particularly proud, of course, of the seed system toolbox, which is one of the very best of the tools in the set there. So really great to have this, and great to have this, the webinar and the course. If you go to the landing page, if you go to the RTB website with the golden eggs, you will see this landing page, which provides a kind of a summary information of what the toolbox is all about, the purpose, impact, a little bit of a description, the collaborators, and then you can go on from that also to the user guide, and you can also then go on to the toolbox itself. If you want a quick introduction, go to the landing page, and of course, nice, you can look at the other golden eggs as well. So partnerships and capacity building, absolutely core. We're moving into what's called the one CGIAR. And we're looking really to have more profound research outcomes and being able to translate those into development outcomes. And right at the heart of much of this, I think, really is seed systems. CG does a lot of work on breeding, conserving genetic resources, etc. But really, seed is the point of interaction in many cases of the CGIR or of research organizations, research for development with those users. And so through seed, really research outcomes can be translated into those development outcomes. And capacity strengthening, absolutely integral to that. It's not going to happen without capacity strengthening. It needs more capabilities to deal with the complexities of these crops and to get larger volumes of seed of higher quality of new varieties into farmers' hands. So, and a lot of collaboration there. It needs really a lot of collaboration. So we're going to be building that collaboration over the next few months. We're also very pleased in this context to be bringing on board Context Network, and I know them fairly well. They collaborated with us in a project in Nigeria, but they're going to be, I think, also presenting over the next few days. So very pleased that we're able to strengthen the collaboration with Context as an important additional player working with us on this. And then, of course, we're immensely grateful to the different donors, primarily the major donors that have made this work possible, and that's the FCDO, that's the Brits, Australia, Switzerland, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, USAID, and a whole host of other CGI Trust Fund contributors that have made all of this possible. So very grateful to our donors. And I think that's my quick introduction. I thank you all, and I wish you a very successful course, and that the materials and ideas presented will be immensely useful to you all in the different jobs that you do. So I'm going to stop there. Thanks so much. It's really a privilege to have had this chance to say a few words.
So Jeff, I think it's over to me now, and we're going to have a video.
It is over to you, Margaret. I thought the sound was off. I was going to give you an introduction. So,
well, feel free, go ahead.
Right. Well, next we're going to hear from Margaret McEwen. She's a social scientist and a senior scientist at SIP. She's based in Kenya, and she is also one of the leaders of the seed toolbox. So we're fortunate to have her with us, and Margaret's going to give us a brief introduction.
Great, thank you, Vivian. So Vivian, let's go for the video first, and then I'll share my screen after that. Thanks.
One-third of calories in low-income countries are met through root, tuber, and banana crops such as potato, sweet potato, yam, cassava, and banana. These are very important for the food security of the poorest. But these crops are vegetatively propagated. Their seed is bulky, perishable, and prone to buildup of pests and diseases. So seed systems of root, tuber, and banana crops are complex. This introduces a series of challenges. One challenge is the adoption of new varieties. Breeders develop improved varieties with farmer and market preferred traits, tolerant to heat and drought. To make sure the work of breeders pays off, farmers need functional seed systems to access quality seeds of new varieties. A group of social and biophysical scientists drawn from CGIAR, National Agricultural Research Systems, and universities have developed a toolbox called Tools for Seed Systems for working with root, tuber, and banana crops. The tools address knowledge gaps such as capturing variety and seed demand characteristics of different types of farmers, appropriate seed delivery pathways, seed health management, and appropriate seed regulatory frameworks. The toolbox brings together proven methods that successfully work to diagnose, plan, and improve seed systems. There are 11 tools and a glossary which National Agricultural Research Systems, non-governmental organizations, and decision makers use to understand and support seed system development. Learn more about Tools for Seed Systems. Join a training opportunity with partner institutions in Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America and the Caribbean, and Southeast Asia. Invest in Tools for Seed Systems so that together we ensure an evidence-based systematic approach for seed system development. Contact us via toolsforseedsystems.org.
So like Graham and like Jeff and all of us here, I'm really excited that we're starting this session of training. And as the Toolbox video said, this is hopefully the first of a series of trainings that will have a focus across different continents. So we all know that roots, tubers, and bananas, that the crops are vitally important to millions of people in least developed countries, and that really the seed systems are predominantly informal, and this provides both opportunities and also challenges. The farmers that we're working with generally tend to have less than 2 hectares of land, and they're family farms. So we have a number of both opportunities and challenges. Seed systems are complex. We obviously need to have skills around agronomy, but also economics, plant breeding, pathology, social science, botany, and we need to have appropriate policy and regulatory frameworks. And what I really find fascinating about seed systems is how these different disciplines and perspectives come together. And as a group, the RTB Community of Practice for Seed Systems, we work in interdisciplinary ways, and that is something that we're learning about all the time, and we hope through the continued application of tools we learn across disciplines. Over the past few years, we've developed this toolbox with a number of tools, and that has led to us identifying a number of major gaps that we wrote about in a recent paper in Outlook on Agriculture. These gaps relate to how do we get seed, quality seed, two different types of farmers in different contexts and for different crops. There's no one size fits all, and this is a continuing challenge for everyone. Breeders are doing a great job in terms of identifying preferred traits for different end users and consumers. But without functioning seed systems and seed delivery pathways, we're not going to benefit from those improved varieties. As Graham mentioned in his words at the beginning, one of the particular challenges of vegetatively propagated crops is the accumulation of pests and diseases. So a challenge that we have identified and are trying to address is how do we ensure seed health and reduce the risk of the spread of disease. Related to the seed delivery pathways is understanding the demand characteristics of different types of farmers. So by different types of farmers, obviously we mean better off farmers, poorer farmers, men, women, youth, etc. And their demand characteristics will differ according to crop and context and the conditions within which they are farming. And then, as I said earlier on, we need effective policies, particularly around seed regulation and how seed markets work. So as a group, we are working across 17 countries, and we are more than 50 researchers and growing all the time and multidisciplinary. So as the video showed, we have got 11 tools and one glossary, which helps us to understand the terminology across the tools. Each tool has been validated in at least 2 country contexts and across at least 2 different crops. And the evidence from those validations has been written up in peer-reviewed publications. Each tool also has a very short description sheet so that you can get an overview very quickly of the tool and a more in-depth user guide. So the tools are replicable, they're open source, and they're backed by science. We often get asked when we're introducing the toolbox, well, you've got all these tools, where do we start? You know, which one is best? How do we do this? So we'll go into this more in the next few days, but we see 2 ways of looking at this. One is an entry point through the seed value chain, and the other through using the project cycle. So here we've got a diagram of the seed value chain from plant genetic resources through to early generation seed production, decentralized multiplication, farmer and trader use, which is perhaps more in the informal system for our RTB crops, and then eventually to markets and consumers. Now, some of the tools can be used across the whole of the value chain, and one in particular, which Jorge is going to start with, is the multi-stakeholder framework, and that provides a comprehensive overview of how the seed system is functioning, looking at seed availability, access, and quality. But what is critical there is looking at this from different seed system stakeholders. So as we know, we all have different perspectives. Researchers might have one perspective, a seed user another perspective. So we're looking at how the seed system functions from different perspectives. Many of the tools in the toolbox at the moment focus on the downstream end, where we're trying to understand much more about farmer behavior and what is it that farmers prefer about varieties, what is it they prefer about seed. So some of these tools we'll learn more about today, the small n exploratory case studies, the 4 square method, means end chain, etc. We also have some tools which are looking more at the formal seed system side and business models around seed production. So one of those is the Sustainable Early Generation Seed Business Analysis tool. And as Graham mentioned, Context also have a business analysis tool for cassava processor-led models. And we're looking forward to learning more about that. So this is one way of thinking, how do we start to analyze how a seed system is functioning, depending on our own country or institutional context, where would it be best to focus our questions? The second way is looking at the project cycle. So that goes from problem identification, the scoping or diagnostic stage, then looking at identification of objectives and designing specific strategies through to implementation, monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And then some tools that are looking at scenario analysis. And here I would like to highlight in particular impact network analysis, which Karen Garrett will be talking about later on in the week, which is a scenario building tool, and then also integrated seed health approach. So as you can see here, many of the tools are focused either on the initial problem identification stage or the monitoring and learning stage in the project cycle. So whereas we started with roots, tubers, and bananas, we're now expanding into other crops. And this is why we're really happy to see so many colleagues coming from different types of seed system interventions and crops. We're now covering 10 crops. And that includes forages, forest species, and also some cereals such as teff and wheat. The tools have been applied across 26 countries, and there have been 76 applications to date. So we see the toolbox as starting with roots, tubers, and bananas, but definitely the tools can be adapted and used for other crops. So,
sorry, Margaret.
Yeah.
A minute and a half.
Okay, thank you. So we're now coming into the first stage of this training program. There are 3 stages. There is this week, 3 days, where the different tool developers are presenting the tools, and we hope that we'll get a lot of questions and comments and suggestions and things. Then for a limited number of case studies, probably 4 in-country teams will use these tools in their own situations, addressing some research questions or development-orientated questions in their context. And that will happen between August and September. And then finally, in October, we will have a wrap-up workshop where we are inviting you all again to learn about what happened in country. What were the types of results that are coming out? How can they be used in the design of better seed interventions? So we really are happy to be at this stage now of starting the process of building capacity, and we see that moving into the transition of the 1CG. We have these 4 major gaps that we have identified and that we want to continue unpicking and understanding these knowledge gaps in more depth. We're looking forward to supporting existing projects, but also supporting the design and implementation of new projects. So thank you on behalf of Connie and Jorge. The 3 of us have been trying to support the seed system community of practice over the last few years. And please go and have a look at the user guide for the toolbox, which gives the overview. And it's on the website. Please go back and have another look at the video, and there's other information there. So thank you very much. Thanks. And back to you, Jeff.
Okay, thank you so much, Margaret. Next, we're going to hear from Jorge Andrade Piedra. He is a plant pathologist. He's an expert in potato diseases. He's based at SIP in Lima. And Jorge is going to tell us about the stakeholder framework.
Hello, everyone. This is Jorge Andrade Piedra, and I'm going to present you the multi-stakeholder framework for interventions in roots, tubers, and banana seed systems. This presentation was prepared in collaboration with Jeff Bentley, and it is part of the Toolbox course. So this is one of the methodologies that is part of this toolbox for working with root, tubers, and banana seed systems. And the work to develop this methodology has been done under the umbrella of the CGR research program on roots, tubers, and bananas. Okay, let's start with the purpose of the multi-stakeholder framework. The first purpose is to help understand seed systems, either before or after starting an intervention. So in the first case will be for planning, and in the second case will be for monitoring and evaluation. Then the framework is also very helpful to improve seed systems interventions with a better design and analysis of seed systems interventions. Then more specifically, the framework helps us to identify the stakeholders, coordination breakdowns, that is where things go wrong, and how to avoid these breakdowns. Also bottlenecks, that is issues that we have in seed systems or in the interventions. And then the framework also helps us to do a rapid assessment of seed security, that is seed availability, access, and quality. Let's see now the level and uses of the framework. First, the level. So the framework can be used across the entire seed system as an entire seed value chain. So the framework can be used to provide a quick overview of genetic resources, of a breeding program, of early generation seed production, of decentralized multiplication of seed, seed use, and seed distribution. Then the users, the users of the framework can be seed intervention designers, people who designed the new interventions, implementers, that is people who implement or conduct the interventions, the projects, evaluators, practitioners, researchers, donors, and policymakers. So in this picture, you can see colleagues in Tanzania using the framework to analyze a project, Marando Bora, in sweet potato. So in this case, these are people, practitioners, scientists who just finished a project, and they are using the framework to analyze the intervention. Regarding the output and audience of the multi-stakeholder framework, first the output. The framework provides a nice qualitative description of a seed system, including an overview of anticipated constraints and obviously the stakeholders that participate in a seed system. It provides also a snapshot of the state of knowledge about the seed system and seed security, including availability, accessibility, and quality. So I think that is one of the main advantages of using the framework, is to have a nice snapshot of what's happening on a seed system at a certain time. Then the audience, the people who are using this output, is similar to the users, that is seed intervention designers, implementers, evaluators, practitioners, researchers, donors, and policymakers, and also lobbyists, that is people who are trying to influence policymakers. Regarding the minimum sample size for the multi-stakeholder framework, there is no minimum sample size. So as many stakeholders as possible should be consulted depending on on the time and budget. So here, for example, you can see a picture of one PhD student, Israel Navarrete, in Ecuador. He is working with several stakeholders in a workshop using the framework. So as you can see here, there are maybe 10, 15 people. So it really depends on your time and budget. But as many as possible, the stakeholders should be consulted for the framework. In terms of resources for using the framework, first, the number of people, we recommend between 1 and 3 people to collect and analyze the information. plus obviously a larger group of stakeholders to meet that outline the seed system. In terms of equipment, it is very basic, basically internet, a vehicle, venues and stationery for workshops and focus group discussions, and obviously a blank framework table to fill in. In terms of expertise, we suggest a mix of people with expertise on biophysical and social sciences, including people with expertise on gender. So basically a good mix of agronomists and social scientists who are familiar with seed systems will do it. In terms of timing and duration for the framework, first about timing, well, since the framework can be used for planning, it can be used just before an intervention. And this is what we actually hope that at least one of the teams, of the country teams, will do it during this course. For monitoring and evaluation purposes, the framework can be used after a seed intervention or during one intervention. So it can be used for monitoring and evaluation. In terms of duration, applying all the steps you will see in a moment takes between 1 to 8 weeks. So just for you to know, a workshop with key stakeholders can be held in a single day. So if you are in a hurry, you can use the framework probably in a week. Okay, now let me introduce you to the framework, the multi-stakeholder framework, the tool itself. So basically, the framework is a matrix. You can see the rows have the stakeholders of a seed system. So you can see there are policymakers, national research institutes, international research institutes, etc., etc. So if you need to add a new stakeholder, that's possible. And then we have the columns. So we use the concepts of seed security. So first we have seed availability and supply. Then we have seed accessibility with 3 categories: delivery channel features, affordability and profitability issues, information to create awareness and demand. And then we have seed quality, including variety and biodiversity, and the concepts of seed quality, including health, genetic purity, physiological age, and physical quality. So where each row and column meet, they form a cell, which can be filled in by the teams, defining the role of each stakeholder in relation to a seed security function, or a bottleneck, or an information gap. Okay, moving on the steps for using the framework. We have 6 steps. The first one is to identify the stakeholders and analyze the context with a literature review and field visits. I think this is very important to have a thorough literature review on the seed system and the crop in a certain area. And also field visits to identify the stakeholders and have a feeling of what's happening in the seed system. Then we can use several methodologies like semi-structured interviews or focus group discussions or workshop with the stakeholders. So we need to organize this. So for example, in the case of a workshop, we will need to define the venue, the date, the persons who will attend this meeting, the agenda, etc. And then in step 3, in each of these methodologies, in the interviews or in the focus group discussions or in the workshops, we need to work with the matrix, with the framework matrix. So we will draw the matrix and define the role of each stakeholder for each function. So for example, what is the role do policymakers play for seed availability? So we need to fill each relevant cell in the matrix that we just saw. Then in step 4, we can identify gaps, information gaps, and also bottlenecks or coordination or potential coordination breakdowns among the different stakeholders. With step 5, we will analyze the data as a chart and also as a narrative using the information previously collected with the literature review, the interviews, and the workshop sessions. So we need to analyze, to basically describe qualitatively the seed system, the partners, the stakeholders, and the roles, potential coordination breakdowns, information gaps, etc. And then we need to draft publications, of course, and these publications can be shared with some stakeholders for comments. And the results can be published as working papers, journal articles, on websites, as blogs, etc. So basically, we need in step 5 and 6 is to analyze the data, and step 6 is to publish the data. Let's describe a little bit better the methods that can be combined with the stakeholder framework. So first, as I said before, we can use literature reviews. So we need to read project reports, brochures, blogs, etc., other great literature, and also books and articles on the agriculture and seed systems of the region. So the idea is to have a good description of what's happening on the specific seed system on which we are working on. Then we can use semi-structured interviews and focus group discussions. So we can have small groups, 5 or 7, with 5 or 7 questions to start the chat with the individual or small groups from one group of stakeholders. So for example, plant breeders, seed traders, extension processors, seed multipliers and users, etc. We need to take notes, obviously, and write up the results. Sometimes we use this information as to refine the questions that we will ask to the stakeholders in a workshop. So these focus group discussions of semi-structured interviews can be used to refine the kind of questions that we are going to ask. Or if we have a group, certain stakeholder that cannot attend the workshop, then we can do an interview with these people. And then the other method that we use to fill in the framework is workshops, multi-stakeholder workshops. So we have representatives of different stakeholders groups that meet and fill in the table, the framework. So this is a quick overview of the 3 methods that we can use to fill in the information of the framework. Consideration for working on seed systems of root tubers and bananas and other crops, actually, not only for the framework, but for most of the methodologies that we use, is gender. So we need to be very sensitive on gender, on potential gender issues around seed systems. So the framework allows gender information to be disaggregated. So, for example, we can have focus group discussions with women for seed users, or we can have specific interviews just for women or for men on certain topics of seed security. We also need to be aware that some stakeholders groups are mainly of one gender. So, for example, in some crops, most traders of informal seed may be women. So we recognize that this in the analysis and be very aware on collecting gender disaggregated information, and also do the analysis taking into consideration gender. See now some of the limitations of the framework. The first one is that the framework shouldn't be used to gather quantitative information. If we need to analyze and collect quantitative information, we need to apply other tools from our toolbox. And as I said at the beginning, the framework provides a qualitative description of a seed system. Then we need expert facilitation for the workshops. Because in these workshops, we should challenge the assumptions from researchers and project staff. So for this, we need good facilitation. And also, since we are going to have different stakeholders in a workshop, we probably will have some difficult discussions in some issues. So we need good facilitation for the workshops. Let's see now some of the main advantages of using the framework. The first one is that the framework is a fast method for having a qualitative big picture of a seed system or an intervention. So if we want to have a quick snapshot of what's happening on a seed system or an intervention, then the framework is the tool to use. It also brings the topic of seed security. So to illustrate this idea of having a quick snapshot of a seed system, we have this publication, Understanding Root Tubers and Banana Seed Systems and Coordination Breakdown. In this publication, you can see how the framework was adapted for the seed system security assessment developed previously by Louise Sperling, Tom Remington, and other collaborators, and how we adapted the framework for roots, tubers, and bananas, and how it was used to describe several interventions and analyze several interventions around the world. Then, in more recent cases, the framework also can be used to identify participants and design the key informal interviews and focus group discussions to explore regulations for potato and cassava seed in Vietnam, Nigeria, and Kenya. So in this case, the framework is informing, is helping to identify stakeholders and design key questions for other methodologies. And also, as I said before, the framework can be used to estimate seed security. So for example, in the case of Ethiopia, it has been used in teff and wheat. This is my last slide. So thank you very much for your attention. You can see my email address and also Jeff's email address if you want to contact us for more details. We also are providing the links to key documents. The first one is the user guide. So you will have the chance to see a more thorough description of how to use the framework. And also the description sheet is just a couple of pages, and you will see basically the same information that I provided here, but with a little bit more detail. So thank you very much for your attention.
All right. Jorge, we have a question or two in the Q&A section.
Yes, Jeff.
Okay. You want to just
let me check the Q&A section, just a moment. Okay, it says from Marta Giraldo, thanks Marta for your question. For the framework, could be including researcher or crop specialists and extension agents. Yes, Marta, definitely. Yeah, I think having scientists and researchers and crop specialists in these workshops, it's key. Usually, this is one of the stakeholders that we include in the workshop for using this methodology. Yeah.
Okay, and we also have a question from Prosi Isu Bikalu.
Okay, Prosi, you said an example of a populated matrix would help me to understand what type of info to include, hence the questions to ask. Yes, if you go to the link to the toolbox, then you can go to the link to the framework, and then you can download the paper that I described in my presentation. And there you can see examples of matrices filled in with information. There is also a book, well, it's actually a working paper, where we describe, I think it's 13 case studies. And for each case study, we have the matrix. So you can see that. Maybe I see Viviana is sharing the link, but I will provide you, Prosi, with the link to this working paper. You will see a lot of examples actually of matrices filled in with information. Okay.
Okay.
Let's see, there is another question from Seturan. Are we looking at the importance of the influence of each stakeholder as follow in the stakeholder analysis in the seed system? I think this is a very important issue, Seturan. As in any complex system, there is always power struggles, I would say. I think we need to be very sensitive to first identify and understand these potential issues. We actually call them coordination breakdowns. So the framework can help us to understand these potential coordination breakdowns. And if we see that there is some issues, we will need to manage that. For example, before having the workshop, we can have interviews with the specific people to try to understand these issues. But I think that this is very important. And actually, using the framework help us to raise or to identify these potential coordination breakdowns. Let's see, there is another question here from Mark Tokula. How does the framework ensure appropriate respondents are selected in the focal group discussion? I think that is why it's important to have social scientists in the team. I am a plant pathologist, for example, so I don't have the expertise to sometimes to identify key stakeholders or to design appropriate questions. So having people with experience on multi-stakeholder processes, I think is important. So having social scientists in the team, I think it's key to be able to ensure that all people have their voice heard. There is a comment from Tom. Hello, Tom. Actually, the framework was adapted from one of the tools, the seed security assessment, seed system security assessment tool developed by Tom Remington and Louis Sperling and other collaborators. So Tom is asking, given the prevalence of donor support and subsequent seed subsidy, might add donor times implementing agency to the matrix? Yes, it's an option. I think it's an option. We provide here, I would say, a tool, but the tool can be adapted to specific conditions, Tom. So if we need to add another column or rows for specific stakeholders, that is totally doable. Yeah, we actually encourage people to adapt the tools to their specific conditions, probably at a certain level, because if the tool is modified too much, probably then using the same tool in other conditions will be difficult. So having meta-analysis with tools that have been modified could be a challenge. Let's see, from Anna, is the information collected static, or does one have to update the stakeholder matrix while the project is ongoing? Yes, ideally, we can use the framework at the beginning. So in the diagnostic and scoping phase, you remember the project cycle that Margaret presented at the beginning, but then the framework can also be used as a tool for monitoring and evaluation. So it can be used, I don't know, every month, every 6 months, or every year, for example. So we can have the tool being used at different stages during the intervention. Setting, it says, considering the level of rigor employed, are the results from such analysis acceptable for publication in peer-reviewed journals? I think this is a very good question, Seteng. In the case of when we adapted this tool, we published the results in a peer-reviewed journal. So I think it's possible. You can complement the framework with other tools. You will see during this week that the framework can be used in combination with other tools. But I think it can be, the results that we are getting using the framework can be published in peer-reviewed journals.
Hello,
Jeff, yes, how are the time?
Interesting questions coming in. You have a minute. Maybe you can pick 2 more questions in the next minute. Thank you.
Okay.
One more. 1 minute.
One more. Okay. From David Obise-san, is this tool adaptable to other crops apart from RTBs? Yes, David, that is totally doable. So we can use the framework for pulses, for grains, for forages, for forests. We actually have some examples already of using the framework with other crops.
Okay, and with that, thank you very much, Jorge. That was excellent.
Thank you, colleagues.
So we're going to move along now. Our next presenter is Connie Almakinders. She is an associate professor at the Knowledge, Technology, and Information Group at Wageningen University. She's well known for her published research on farmers and seed systems. Connie is going to tell us about the small n exploratory case study.
Hello, everybody. I'm Connie Almekinders, and I'm presenting here one of the tools in the RTB seed system toolbox called the Small and Exploratory Case Study, which is a more general tool, but together with Jeffrey Bentley, we adapted this for the specific use in seed system research. The purpose of the small and exploratory case study is to understand and diagnose farmer seed systems. And farmer seed systems are a part of the value chain in this figure that you have seen before below in the slide. And the farmer seed system sits where the circle is indicated. It describes this part of the seed value chain in order to identify the challenges in improving the local availability and access to quality seed. Understanding the farmer seed system means with the small and exploratory case study that you usually focus on a single food crop, an RTB crop, at the farm household level in 2 or more communities. The users of this tool, well, you are potential users of this tool, and because you might be a person who on a routine daily basis works with farmers, talks about their seeds and varieties, and you may be involved in designing seed system interventions, implementing them, evaluating them. So you are practitioners and or researchers. Many questions may be answered with this type of data collection, and please have a look at the user guide on our website where we have indicated more examples. Here is one of them, a typical question that some of you may already have been dealing with. Can decentralized seed multipliers improve the access to quality seed for male and female farmers? Now, what do you need to know to be able to answer this type of question? That brings me to the key issues, the key information when you're focusing on one crop, which is the number of varieties that farmers are growing. What varieties are they growing, improved or local? And what seed are they actually using? Are they saving their own seed, or do they get it from somewhere else, from the neighbor, the family, the market, or maybe from a program? And what are the motivation to use their own seed or other people's seed? And how is that off-farm seed being acquired? Do they get it as a gift? Do they purchase it with cash? Or there are other ways of accessing this seed? And of course, the source of seed of new, improved varieties is important as well, because normally they cannot get that from the neighbors because it's a new variety. So where do they get the information and the seed of those varieties? Before going into some more detail about the application of the tool, let me say something about gender, because it influences the use of the tool. Small and exploratory studies are meant to find, that is to explore, the differences in seed and variety use that are related to gender and other forms of social differentiation. Disaggregation in categories of farmers for economic status, rich and poor, and gender, like of the household head or the interviewees, are the two most powerful dimensions of the disaggregation that we have experienced in our studies so far. Disaggregation along those lines into relevant farmer categories helps you to understand the relation between households in a community. Timing and duration. When to use the small and exploratory case study. When we're talking about a seed system intervention or project, then have a look at the typical figure on the right-hand side with the project cycle. And you can find that this tool is particularly suitable for the diagnostic phase, which is the black circle on the right side of the figure. For example, after having applied a multi-stakeholder framework and before you really design the project intervention that you are wanting to carry out. Or you can do it before you dive into a deeper or larger study that will take much more time, it's much more costly. You can also see a small circle on the left-hand side of the project cycle indicating that the tool is also very suitable to learn. I will come back to that. As for the duration of the study, I have a rule of the thumb, which is, well, take 1 week per village and then adapt the rest of the design to it in terms of number of teams that you need or the team sizes, the number and the length of the questionnaire, the number of farmers you want to interview. Output and audience. The output is the characterization of these 1 or 2 community seed systems that you have studied, which then gives you a description of the current use of varieties, seed sources and seeds acquisitions by the farmers in those communities. The audience, the same as the users, so that's you and your team who are working with the farmers and their seed systems. But it may also include people who take more strategic decisions, those who oversee programs and budgets. And in that case, you will have to translate your findings into readable and understandable reports. The sampling. The study design is exploratory and not representative. So we work with a minimum sampling size and not with a formula that calculates how many farmers need to be interviewed. Typically for this type of studies is to sample 2 or 3 communities. Communities are as if they are the unit of sampling, because communities form networks of social relations and seed often flows in these social networks. A minimum of 12 to 15 farmers per category, and each of the communities, and what these categories are depends on the socio-economic dimensions you're interested in. And I've mentioned rich and poor, gender as categories that we have worked with quite frequently. So you end up with 45 to 60 farmers, up to 90 farmers in total to be interviewed. Resources that you need. I've mentioned earlier as a rule of the thumb, 1 week of data collection per village. And an interview takes an hour and a half coming and going, so 2 hours per interview means that a team or a person can do 4 interviews on a day. That's how you can further plan the number of teams that you need, the transport, etc. For a team, you can start with 2 persons in a team, but they may split up later when they are more familiar with the information that farmers give, and then proceed with doing the interviews individually. Equipment, nothing extraordinary. Transport, pen, paper. Expertise, basic knowledge of the area and the type of farmers and their crops and seeds and varieties. Some interviewing skills, and the use of Excel for data entry is of course a requirement that someone in the team needs to provide. Steps for using the small and case study. Let me take you to it relatively quickly, because you really have to go to the user guide when you're onto it and get more details on how to do it. You identify the representative communities to be characterized. You develop a questionnaire and interview questions, and this is important and really a tip that I would like you to give. While you're developing the questionnaire and the interview questions, prepare the Excel sheet for the data processing, because you will realize that depending on the processing, you may have to formulate your questions differently to get the information in such a form that they allow you to make some calculations, to calculate means and sums, etc. Step 3, define the farmer selection plan. These 12 to 15 farmers per category, how are you going to identify them? If you later make a report, you have to justify and explain how you did that. Step 4, try out the questionnaire by validating it in the field. You will see how many of those questions are being answered by farmers that you're thinking, no, the question needs to be framed differently. Plan your logistics for the data collection. And finally, when you did your data collection, enter the data in the Excel sheets or similar software. This is very quickly. Another tip, apart from the user guide with more details, look for example studies. These example studies give you unique details on how you can do it for different crops, how you can do it for different type of farmers, different type of questions, and there are quite a number of these example studies on our website. When you look at these example publications, you see that the authors have usually used more information than only that of the survey. So here are these other methods that can be combined with the survey: the multi-stakeholder framework, the 4 square methods, literature, and interviews with key informants, observations. They come all part of a mixed method study in which you combine qualitative and quantitative data. Limitations of this tool. This tool is not for impact studies, as it is not meant to work with representative samples. The name already says it. It's exploratory, and you use it to understand and to diagnose and to learn about seed systems. Not being representative is for some researchers and politicians a problem. They only like to trust large numbers. Well, you can refer them to the publications in credible scientific journals that have accepted this type of studies. And you can tell them that you are aware of the difference with the large N studies that claim to be representative. There's another limitation to this small N exploratory case studies, and we have experienced that ourselves, that in very highly variable context, or when situations may vary strongly between farmers and communities, it can be difficult to see a pattern or a coherent picture. We had that with our cassava studies in Nigeria. We had not expected that everybody was selling and buying stems throughout the season, and we did not arrive at seeing a pattern. If you would find such a situation, you have to go, and you may have to go deeper into a few cases, talk at length with farmers to understand their situation, or you may enlarge the numbers of farmers to be interviewed. I would go for the first one, because I want to understand how farmers are reasoning, what the choices are that they make and why. But for other research who are more quantitatively oriented, they may go for increasing the numbers and hope that the numbers will tell the story. The main advantages of the small and exploratory case studies are, among others, no major huge budgets required. Also, no extraordinary capacities involved. So I'm very sure that many of you who are listening today already have all the capacities at hand to be able to be involved in such a study. Important as well is that the data may become available relatively soon, because you're working with a relatively modest number of surveys. And then these data may become available for the research team. So it is an opportunity for a research team to become familiar with the seed systems you're working with. And this makes it a very relevant learning experience, because the insights can stay close to the data collectors themselves. Well, this was in a nutshell the small N exploratory case study with the most important elements of it. It's not enough, and therefore I refer to the user guide and the description sheet where you can find more information. And please, if you want to know more, contact us. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks very much, Connie. We've got a couple of questions in, or did you want to take a moment and clarify anything?
Oh, should not. Yeah, first of all, it's horrible to hear yourself back talking. So I hope I wasn't making two ugly faces. And I didn't scroll down the question and answer windows. So I see Seten has a question and Steve has a question. I want to make a small comment on something on one of the slides. I said that at one point in time that the small N exploratory case study is not representative. But I mean that in a particular way. So I'll take a second to explain that. It is a representative, it is a case study that is representative because we make these categories, and we have relevant categories in which make sure that everybody is included, that also women are particularly included. However, you can run into a problem with representativeness if you do not know how large the proportion is of women in the total population. Now, with women and men, usually it is not the biggest problem because it's half-half, 50-50, if there's not too many migration effects. But when you talk about the category of rich and poor farmers, you do not know in the total population how many farmers are belonging to one or the other category. Then it's difficult to come with some sort of an average effect or an average number of varieties or whatever the variable is that you were investigating. That was very short. I hope it was clear. Was it clear, Jeff, in one way? Yeah. And otherwise, you can come back in your question and answer window with more detailed request for explanation. Let me go back to the first question. Does the small and exploratory case study differ from a normal survey that also uses questionnaires? Thank you for that question. No, it is in that sense not, it's a survey. Yeah, it's a survey. What we wanted to emphasize by calling it a small and exploratory case study is by pointing out that you don't necessarily go into 400 interviews. You don't necessarily go in 8 or even more. You can work with much smaller populations and categories, and you do not necessarily have to do all this more advanced statistical testing. What we get out of a small exploratory case study, small and exploratory case study, is usually descriptive statistics. You can describe for a category of farmers their variety and seed use. And not having the statistical tests, again, for some researchers who are very quantitatively oriented, this might be problematic. But we have experienced by publishing on these by collecting data with the small and exploratory case studies and turn them into publications, that there are quite a number of journals very open to this type of information. I hope that answered the question. I'm going on to Steve's question. One of the key tools and capacities for small N approach is have an open mind and not a fixed mindset. For example, we are looking for X data to prove X point to support our intervention ideas. Do you have suggestions on how to encourage and motivate having this open mind when it comes to doing small N work? Thank you for that question, Steve. I think it's a very important question, because it is the purpose of the small and exploratory case study to be not narrow-minded and actually take an opportunity to develop that broader view on how the access to variety and seeds works for different type of farmers in a community. And very important to combine, therefore, with the small and exploratory data collection is to do interviews beforehand with key experts, but also, you know, walk around in farming community, try to talk with farmers, get some ideas of what farmers think is working well, what isn't working well, what would they like to see changed in the near future. That can help you to come to a more relevant survey to explore the challenges with the varieties and the seeds that farmers have. And as I said, key experts can play a similar role. We often do not think about talking with the local extension agent, for example, but these people that work on the shop floor, that do a lot of project work, for example, they know the local situation so much better than we do. And especially for me, flying in from the north, you know, I shouldn't, I think, pretend that I'm able to develop a small N survey coming out of the Netherlands and doing my little thing. No, I need my local people to understand what might be the relevant small N exploratory case study. Can I just continue, Jeff? You'll stop me also when I'm too long with the answers.
We'll stop you at the end. Just carry on.
Basil, thank you for a question. What constitutes a community in the light of a system? I'm not so sure how it relates to a system, but your question about what is a community is a very relevant one, because the way communities are formed, again, vary from place to place. A community in Asia is a totally different type of community than in the Andes. Communities might be spread, communities might be confined, and that's all indeed an issue when you define for such a survey what constitutes the system, being the community. Again, there you have to figure out with your local collaborators what do you think is a useful community when you're, for example, very interested in seed sourcing. What do you consider seed sourcing within the community? What do farmers consider their neighbors and their friends? Or when it is going far away to look for seed? Those kind of interviews you have to do beforehand, and that can help you to have a relevant delineation of your system being the community. I hope that helps, Basil. Then Anna, hi, good Anna to see you there. Yes, I know who you are, and of course the rest in the audience not so well. And you're currently working in Ghana on an on-farm tricho scaling project for variety selection prior to seed dissemination. I know this seed system tool is very useful for us. I'm very keen to know if we can combine the two tools technologies, the seed system tool and the tricho climb up citizen science. Yeah, the tricho trial, as I know it, Anna, is typically a large N kind of exercise. And I think it is inevitable that we find the moments in project cycles and research projects in how to jump from large N to small N and from small N again to large N. When I'm working with people, researchers who are very quantitatively oriented, they always want to start with the large N because they say, well, how can I otherwise dive deeper? And I'm saying, well, but how do you want to be able to usefully sample and collect your large numbers if you don't know the more contextualized situation as farmers experience those? So I would always start with the small N. Key, I think, is that these two type of data collection, large N and small N, how do you say that? One comes after another. I can't think about the English word. Sorry, I'm not a native English speaker. They interchange. Help me out in that one. Yeah.
Sorry. Hey, Connie. Nathan here, a very interesting set of questions again. Maybe you can take one more in the next 30 seconds.
Okay, I cannot see which is the most relevant one. So David, sorry for jumping your question. I just go to the next one in the row, which is Aman Preetz, and you're asking, how do you define rich and poor farmers? Again, a very good question. Thank you for that. When I'm coming into a community, I cannot know. And it's again an example of the need to do your homework before you really construct your survey, and the homework being to interact with your local collaborators, to walk through communities, to spend some time in the field. Essentially, that's it. And you have to talk with farmers. What do they consider rich and poor? And you have to talk with the NGO people and the extension people that you work with. I think my session has come to an end. So sorry that I couldn't answer the other questions. I hope the questions are being saved, and that we'll find a way to answer those questions and have them placed on our Toolbox website. Thank you very much, everybody, for the questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Connie. So, and thank all of you for the excellent questions. Next, we're going to hear from Fleur Kilwinger. She's a PhD candidate at the Knowledge, Technology and Innovation Group at Wageningen University. And she is the author of two of the tools in the toolbox. And today we're going to hear about means and chain analysis. So take it away, Floor.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this short introduction video of the means and chain analysis. My name is Fleur Killinger, and I'm gonna tell you in short what you can do with this tool. The means and chain analysis already exists for quite a while, and it originates from the field of marketing and consumer studies, and it was designed to understand how consumers evaluate and why they value a certain product or service. And in the case of our research field, this can be how farmers view an improved variety or a certain seed source or management practices, inputs. So it can be used for a variety of things. So the means and chain analysis is usually conducted just with one person, so an individual, and it can be used by a variety of people such as researchers, marketeers, product developers, and managers. So the output that you generate with the means and chain analysis is an overview of how consumers, and in our case it will likely be farmers, evaluate a product or service and why they value it. This is usually in the form of a hierarchical value map, where you aggregate the responses of a group of respondents so that you get an overview how a certain group of people evaluates the product or service. Yeah, the audience is kind of similar to the users. It's valuable for researchers, marketeers, product developers. In our case, it would be, for example, breeders, project managers, policymakers. Yeah, and about the minimum sample size, there it really matters which technique you apply. We will go into detail about the different approaches there are later, but mainly there's a soft and a hard lettering approach. And if you apply a soft lettering approach, then 30 to 60 respondents will be enough because it's more exploratory. And if you want to increase your numbers, then you can shift to a hard lettering approach because it's easier to get larger sample sizes with a hard lettering approach. Yeah, and the number of people needed to conduct a means and chain analysis really depends on the sample size and the method you decided to apply. So for soft lettering, a skilled interviewer can conduct 3 or 4 interviews a day. But that's really if you are familiar with the method. Otherwise, it will take longer. Hard lettering interviews, you could even do them via the computer, and then you can really increase your sample sizes without having to add extra interviewers and so on. Then you will just need someone who develops and designs the software. The further equipment that you need, yeah, that really depends on how you collect your data. If you do soft lettering, you might want to use paper and pencil or record voices, or a tablet might be a bit difficult because they usually give a lot of information, so it might be difficult to type. Hard lettering can also be done using paper and pencil, but it's even easier on a computer. And the expertise needed is, yeah, you need trained people that know about the means and chain analysis, and it doesn't really matter which method you apply. You need to understand the underlying theory, and you need to know how these type of interviews are conducted. And regarding the timing of a mean and chain analysis in a project, it doesn't really matter. It's just like any time that you want to get insight into consumers, farmers, or any other actors' preferences and choices, you can conduct a means and chain analysis. How long it will take to conduct a means and chain analysis really depends on your sample size and which method that you use. Yeah, like we said, a soft lettering approach. If you have one skilled researcher, they can conduct 3 or 4 interviews a day. So that would mean if you want to interview 30 respondents, 10 working days are needed. And also we have not included time for transport in this. So if your respondents are far away, then you need to add the traveling time to that calculation. And hard lettering approach, yeah, then it will go faster, especially if you do it via the computer. So as any study, a means and chain analysis starts with a good research design, and that includes how you're going to sample your respondents, select your respondents, which elicitation technique you will use, which lettering technique you will use. All these decisions you have to make on forehand, and they need to be the best suitable decisions that will answer your research questions. And then after that, you can start preparing your materials and, for example, print your forms, prepare the materials that you have under evaluation. And when that is all prepared, you can start with the attribute elicitation. So during the attribute elicitation, you will get a list of attributes that are relevant to the respondent when he evaluates the material or product. Those attributes form the starting point of lettering interviews. So those are the following steps. And when all the lettering data is collected, it can be coded and aggregated in an implication matrix. And from that matrix, we create a hierarchical value map, and that will be the end of your analysis. The means and chain analysis can be combined with several other research methods. There is an example where means and chain was combined with experimental auctions. So farmers were asked to place bids for different types of planting material, and then afterwards they conducted the means and chain analysis to understand why people placed their bids or what they based their bids on. And yeah, it can also be combined, of course, with just surveys and interviews. If you want to know more about your respondents, or if you want to group your respondents or do segmentation research, then yeah, you can ask all kind of additional information from your respondents. And if you have this information from your respondents, you can, of course, divide your data in any way you like. So it can be like men and women, but it can also be like older people and younger people. So in any way you like to split your data, that would be possible if you collect the right information. So that means that the gender responsiveness level is 1. Gender is a significant factor in the tool, but it's not the main reason for using it. The mean and chain analysis data is collected using an interview, a type of interview, so it has all the similar limitations and biases as any kind of survey or interview. So like interviewer bias, real versus ideal answers, guiding questions, all these limitations or pitfalls that you have with a regular interview, they also apply to the mean and chain analysis. So one of the main advantages of the means and chain analysis is that respondents themselves can select and verbalize the attributes or constructs that they deem relevant to evaluate or value a product. So sometimes in surveys we have like predefined categories and we ask them, how important is this to you? How important is that to you? But then a selection is already made of what attributes could be important. And here it's the respondents themselves that have to come up with the list and verbalize what they think is relevant. Another benefit is also that qualitative data is transformed into quantitative data. And that can be preferred because it gives you more of an overview of a group of respondents and what they think.
Okay. Thanks, Floor. You can leave your camera on
Wanted to unmute
right.
myself.
No. So, have you had a chance to look at some of the questions in the Q&A?
Yeah, I'm looking at them now, and the first question is, what does means and really mean? It's how can I best explain that? When people buy or get products or services, they don't usually just simply buy that product. They buy it because they will get a certain benefit, or they can fulfill a certain value with it. So it's a means to an end. It's not just that farmers or anyone wants the means. You want to fulfill certain ends with them. I don't know if that makes a bit of sense if I explain it like that.
Perfect. It's the means to an end.
Yeah, the means to an end.
Like crop varieties, they're for doing something.
Yeah, and that's what you do with the lettering interview. So if you would ask someone, like someone can say, I prefer traditional varieties. And then you ask them, why do you prefer traditional variety? And that can be because it has a longer lifespan, and they have to invest less in seed. And if they have to invest less in seed, they will have more money for other household needs. So then you create a letter starting with the means towards the end, what is actually really important for the respondent.
Okay.
Then the second question, for the part of the chain analysis, am I right to think we look at all actors at each node or function and getting a means of how they evaluate? I think that relates to the earlier question, that the means is like means to an end. That's what it's useful. Okay. Yeah, and evaluating seems to be more qualitative. So how it becomes more quantitative is indeed because you group all the responses in a matrix, and you create that to get an overview. So you first code responses, and those are aggregated in a matrix, and then you get more of a quantitative analysis. And then the following question is if it's possible to use a tablet during the interviews. That would be possible if you use a hard lettering approach, and that means that you have already defined your categories. So then you only have to write down which links that are made. If you use the soft lettering approach, that is really a qualitative interview. So if you then really want to type everything a respondent says, that can be a bit difficult with a tablet. So then you can better use a voice recorder and actually just write your interviews out at home. And how the sample size is determined. Well, what is usually done is that you, what you want to get is an overview of how a certain group of respondents think. And at one point you will realize in your interviews that you get a lot of repetitive answers. And that's usually a sign that you have all the information that you need. And from experience, people know that this is usually between 30 or 60 respondents. But then, of course, they shouldn't be too different. They should somehow be a bit of like-minded respondents. So, for example, young men in a certain region, they might have more similar thoughts than, older women at the other end of the world, so to say. So you really notice it by getting repetitive answers. Then you know that you have most information collected. And I see another question in the chat. What is the clear distinction between soft and hard lettering in terms of sample size, if the soft lettering ranges from 30 to 60 and hard lettering begins from 50? Well, the whole reason why you do a hard lettering approach is because it's actually easier to get large sample sizes. Like I said, the benefit of the means and chain analysis is that respondents themselves select and verbalize attributes or constructs that they find important. With a hard lettering approach, you already select these attributes and constructs, and you just put them in a table, and a respondent makes relations between them. So then you kind of lose the actual benefit of the means and chain analysis. But what you could do is make a combination that if you know already which categories that your respondents have defined in a soft lettering approach, you could transfer to a hard lettering approach, giving them only these categories. Yeah, it's a bit difficult to explain because the means and chain analysis goes with a lot of theory behind it and methodology. So it's not really easy to give a clear answer to these kind of things right now. But I hope that was a bit clear. Let's see, another question here is, how does this compare to the perceptual mapping in marketing? I'm not really familiar with that theory, so I don't know. And there's another question of the limitations indicated as bias. Is the interviewer or the respondent? About the interviewer bias. Yeah, I think what I mean there is just that you have to be careful of the general interviewer bias that is always there. Like if you, for example, very clearly mention that you are for a certain NGO who distributed and promoted the variety, and thereafter you're going to say, what do you think about this variety? The chances that they will give you a very positive answer are quite high. So you, like in any interview, you really have to be careful that you as an interviewer are not, what you want is the real answer and not an idealized response. So that's not really a thing of the means and chain alone. That always happens in interviews. Yeah, and I think actually the means and chain could even reduce a little bit of that bias, because if you would say, if you do an interview from an animal welfare organization and you say, how important do you find animal welfare? Rank from 0 to 5. They might say, oh, I think that's important. But if you really start someone with asking, so like if you buy meat, what do you think is important? Then they have to come up themselves with animal welfare instead of just saying like, oh, yes, no, I find it important. So it could reduce in that way bias if you do it properly. And then see, last question. Can we use the ODKey app with your phone to record all the questions? Okay. Oh, yes, that's fine. I don't know, any more questions?
Fleur, this is Margaret. I have a question. Can you give an example of where the farmer's own evaluation of a product was so completely different from the assumption of the researcher? Because I think this is one of the strengths of this approach, that you're really trying to understand how a farmer or the client perceives the product rather than having a preconceived idea of the different attributes.
Yeah. So one example that came from a study we did with banana farmers was that we always assume that farmers want a higher income with their production, which is also the case. But then we identified that there's many different pathways through which farmers can obtain a higher income. So our reasoning as experts is like, if you grow an improved variety, then you get bigger bunches, and then you will get more income because you can sell more. And indeed, some large-scale farmers identify that pathway, like, I want to grow improved varieties, I have bigger bunches, more yield, more income. But some of the more small-scale farmers actually said like, oh, I really want to grow traditional banana varieties because they have a very long lifespan. So I don't have to invest in more seed. I don't have to replant. So I have way less costs. And if I have less costs, I also have more income. So there's two pathways that lead to a higher income. But one of the pathways is not really the one that we as researchers would identify, which is just continue to grow the local variety.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you, Floor. We're out of time.
All right.
So no, thanks very much. It was excellent, and thanks everyone for your questions. So we're going to move on now. We're going to hear from Lucy Mulugo. Lucy is a lecturer at the Makerere University in the Department of Extension and Innovation Studies. So she is a teacher, and she's doing research on indigenous knowledge and traditional farming systems.
Hello everyone, my name is Lucy Mulugo from Makerere University in Kampala, Uganda. I have the pleasure this morning to take you through the 4-square method for intervening in root, tuber and banana seed systems. The 4-square method is used first and foremost to characterize variety diversity and use. Secondly, it aids identify varieties which are common, safe, limited or rare in communities. Thirdly, it aids understand and document reasons for the dynamic status of different varieties in communities. And lastly, this method helps identify the level and type of interventions which are needed to conserve varieties in communities. The 4-square method is mainly used at village level by researchers, seed intervention designers, and development agents. This method exposes the diverse varieties that farmers maintain on farm. It brings to light varieties that are common, safe, limited or rare in communities, the uses of these different varieties, the management practices that the farmers use to maintain these varieties on farm, their strengths, weaknesses, and reasons for variety diversity by the different social groups, and by this I'm referring to gender, age, socioeconomic status, and the others. This output is mainly for policymakers, researchers, farm organizations, non-government organizations, extensionists, lobbyists, as well as donors. The 4-square method requires a minimum of 8 and a maximum of 6 disaggregated focus groups with farmers, as I will explain later. For the resources required in using the 4-square method, we need 2 to 4 people, depending on their skill sets, and these are mainly to facilitate each focus group discussion. Under equipment, we need flip charts, mainly for drawing the 4 squares, where we place the names or symbols of the varieties that the farmers maintain on farm. We need markers, masking tape, the samples of the different crop varieties or objects to represent them, drawing tools, the seats for participants, data sheets, as well as a camera. And under expertise, we need facilitation and note-taking skills. And under here, we also need local leaders, extensionists or others to invite the community members. Overall, in using this method, we need a multidisciplinary research team, and here we need gender specialists, social scientists, as well as biophysical scientists, and any other that might be deemed necessary. The 4-square method is important for problem identification in a seed system or scoping, but it's also important for monitoring and evaluating a seed system intervention. It takes 2 to 4 hours of field work whilst carrying out each session in the field. This is a schematic representation of the 4-square method. The triangles represent households and the rectangles represent area. Literally, the 4-square method consists of 4 squares which are drawn on either the ground or on a chart, Each of the 4 squares holds varieties of a crop of interest based on their abundance. That is, if the variety is grown by many or few households, and if this is on a large or a small area. Each square therefore represents either varieties grown by many households on large area, many households on small area, few households on large area, or few households on a small area, as indicated in this figure. Under the steps which we follow whilst using the 4 square method, first and foremost, we need to identify the participants, the people with the information that we need, who are mainly farmers. And after identification of the participants, invitations are sent out. Then secondly, these participants create lists of varieties that they grow in their communities. But whilst creating these lists, they must also include varieties that no longer exist. Thirdly, the participants draw 2 lines of 2 by 2 meters or a large cross, either on the ground or on a flip chart or blackboard, and these represent the quadrats or 4 squares that you've just looked at in the previous slide. The 4th step entails placing each variety in one of the 4 squares, depending on whether it is grown on a large area or a small one, and by many households or just a few. And lastly, other characteristics and issues about the variety which are of relevance in relation to the research objectives can also be discussed. Other methods that can be used in combination with the 4 square method include focus group discussions as well as observations. And under observations, the researchers are mainly looking at the participants' behavior during the sessions, and it's important that these are recorded or taken note of. Gender is a significant factor in this tool, though it's not the main reason for using it. It's important that comparable numbers of men and women are included as study participants. Separate exercises are held for men and for women, and this is mainly to enable the participants to speak freely. It's also important to note that groups are facilitated by someone of the same sex as the participants. The limitations of the 4 square method. First and foremost, this method lacks a concrete methodology for determining cutoff points of the different crops. For example, when we are looking at the number of households, we are looking at many versus few. But in this case, what is many and what is few? When you also look at the area, large versus small, how large is large and how small is small? Determining these cutoff points is quite difficult, and it's also specific to the different areas where the research is being carried out. Then secondly, it's difficult for participants to coherently think and discuss along the 2 axes that we've looked at. We have many versus few households, as well as large versus small area. It can easily lead to confusion and incorrect responses from the participants. Then lastly, this method requires skill. The main advantage of using the 4 square method is the fact that it's fundamental to identification of bottlenecks, delineation of key actions, as well as strategies that aid better seed system interventions. And an example that can attest to this is the study that was carried out in Burundi on diminishing farm diversity of East African highland bananas. And there's also one that was carried out in central Uganda on culturally embedded practices of managing banana diversity and planting material. And in both these examples, the 4 square method was used. Thank you for listening.
Okay. Thank you, Lucy. You have some questions in the Q&A. I don't know if you've had a moment to see those yet. You're muted, Lucy.
Well, thank you, Jeff. There's a question from Aman Prit. How do you define rich and poor farmers? Are you dividing them on the basis of their land holdings, or is there a different criteria used? In this context, it's not me or the people on ground that define who are rich or poor. This is mainly dependent on the farmers themselves. They are the ones that define what a rich farmer is or what a poor farmer is. And of course, basing on that, land holdings might come in, but it's up to the farmers to define in their context who a rich or poor farmer is. And there is one from, hello, Jeff.
Yes.
Was that question mine from Aman? Oops. I think I was quite behind.
I'm not sure. I don't actually see that one, but
okay.
I see one from
from Prosi. Yeah, thank you. Prosi is asking me, how do you measure large or many when using the Foursquare? This is mainly dependent on the farmers themselves. In their context, they will tell you what large is and what few is, even the large on the land area. What they mean by a large area, large farm size, and what a small size is. So this is mainly dependent on the farmers themselves to delineate what many and few is, or what large and small is in their context. Similarly, she's asking, what is the boundary between few and many, or large versus small? This is highly dependent on the farmers themselves, and also depends also in the area. What is small in one area might be large in another, depending on where you're collecting your data from. And then there's an anonymous attendee who wants to know, how would you incorporate seed quality and sources information into the method? When we are using the Foursquare method, the farmers tell you about the different varieties that they grow in their communities, what their weaknesses are, the different strengths. So I think these aspects can easily be brought in depending on the particular variety that they are telling you about, which they grow. So when you're using this method and you're trying to find about the details, depending on what you want, what are the weaknesses for a particular variety, what are the strength, management practices, these are some of the questions that you can bring on board. And then also, Prosi would also want to know, how do you then go about the limitations, because they greatly affect the quality of data collected? This is very true, Prosi. And that's why I also included the fact that it needs skill to use this method, because for a skilled person, you can easily know how you can help facilitate this discussion with the farmers to help them delineate and not to get confused. So with skill, this is it's something that can be overcome, because you're already aware that this is a shortcoming. It is something that might arise. So you are aware, and then you can easily take the farmers through this to make sure that they do not get confused or get lost along the way. Apollo Kasharu is asking, we are used to a number of statistically unbiased clustering and grouping farmers and research participants, such as hierarchical clustering. This brings creating homogeneous groups. What advantage does a Foursquare brings that clustering cannot do? I don't seem to get this question very well. Apollo, probably you could retype it and make it a little bit more clear for me to understand. Prosi also wants to know that she missed how the Foursquare is used in identifying bottlenecks. If I take you back to the video that was showed before we started presenting the different tools, there was a part where they showed the project cycle. And under the project cycle, there was a part that showed where the Foursquare method can be used. It could be that there was an intervention that was brought on board. For example, let me give an example of my PhD work. I was trying to look at why there is low use of tissue culture banana as a seed technology. And so in using the Foursquare, it can aid understand what is the problem here. What are the bottlenecks? And it could be probably it could be rising out of preferences. For example, what type of varieties were promoted versus the varieties that farmers grow, or the varieties that farmers desire in that particular community. So it is important that it helps bring to light what could be the problem with this particular intervention that was brought on board to help a particular community or region. So that's one of the ways that this Foursquare method can be used, but also maybe to bring more light, you can also look at the user guide. There are several examples given there, and there's detail given that can help bring some of these issues to light and simplify this method to you. Apollo has retyped, how do you reduce human-induced bias and subjectivity of placing participants in the squares? To begin with, you as a researcher, you cannot put yourself in a situation of knowing this community or region better than the farmers or the people in that community. So in this particular case, you make sure that you're outside and you let the farmers that you're interviewing help delineate for you, in this particular case, what they mean by large versus maybe small area as far as cultivation of a particular crop is concerned. To them, what is few versus many. So that's one of the ways that you can reduce that bias. Place yourself outside and let the people with the knowledge take you through. Then the other thing that I said, among the expertise on the people that we need experts on board. And among these, we need social scientists, we need gender specialists. So with all this on board, it's one method that we use to make sure that bias and subjectivity is reduced. And then Prosi also wants to know, I think we need to be clear on what is on the x-axis and y-axis. Yes, Prosi, that is very true. And when I took you through that schematic drawing of how the Foursquare looks like, I think all that was, it was delineated, because we have a square on that is showing varieties that are grown by many farmers on a large area, varieties grown by many farmers on a small area, varieties grown by few farmers on a small area. So all this, when you look at that schematic drawing, that I think that issue is cleared. And looks like I don't have any more questions.
Okay, Lucy. Well, that was great. I think I think we're near the end of our time anyway. So if you wanted to, if you had one last thought, please go ahead. Otherwise, we'll move on.
I thank you all for putting in time to listen and be part of this presentation today.
Okay. Thanks very much, Lucy, for that excellent presentation, and thank you all for your questions.
You're welcome.
So we're just waiting for them to queue up a very short. It's not a presentation. We're at the end, and here it is, the closing remarks. So next slide, please. Right. Well, I just want to say thank you all for spending this time with us. It's been a really encouraging first day. We've had about 160 people register for this event, and we've had as many as 129 on the call. We've had people from many different kinds of organizations, from the CG centers, from national research agencies, from universities, extension people, NGOs, some farmers. It's been very encouraging. Next, please. Right, so our next meeting is not tomorrow, it's the day after tomorrow, Wednesday, the same time. We'll start the same time on Wednesday as we started today. When we meet next time, we'll look at 4 more tools, and we'll hear about seed tracing, impact network analysis, also called INA, the seed tracker, and experimental auctions. Next, please. Right. I think that's it for the other announcements. Again, thanks to all of you. I just wanted to ask our 3 coordinators, Jorge and Connie and Margaret, do anything else would if there's anything else that the 3 of you would like to add?
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah,
this is Jorge. Well, thank you, Jeff, for facilitating this first day of the event. I think it went very well. And thanks to the panelists for presenting the tools. I think this is the beginning of these 3 days. So we had a quick overview of 4 of the tools, and on Wednesday and Thursday we will finish looking at the other tools. And for the national teams who eventually will apply any of these tools, please have in mind that eventually you will need to select at least one of the tools to apply in your project, in your intervention. So that's it from me, Jeff. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks so much, Jorge. So unless there's anything else,
I'd like to add something, Jeff.
Connie, please.
I really appreciated the Q&A, the questions. I struggled a bit with the Q&A window, whatever, but I've realized how useful your questions are for us. Your questions make me really think, and I'm sure that the other tool owners had that as well. So thank you very much for your questions. That was it.
Great. All right. Margaret, did you want to add anything?
No, I think everything has been covered, and look forward to seeing everyone on Wednesday. So stay with us, folks, because there's some more exciting tools coming up. Thanks.
Okay, and eventually all of these materials will be posted on our website. Here's my name, Jeff Bentley, and my address. If anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to me. And meanwhile, check out our Toolbox website and the website for this course. So once again, thanks so much for being with us, and we'll see you next time.